better if you
Yep,
stay
sorry,
up there.
just starting
that's fine.
starting the
Cool.
recording.
Right.
Cool.
Our speaker tonight, so part of what we're trying to do is increase the diversity of the age of our membership. We have, believe it or not, we have from the 20s up to the 90s here. I think Axel may be our youngest member here tonight. How are you? Wow. How old? I'm 21. Next year I'm 21.
Oh, wow. Good.
The oldest member was to identify himself. 93.
All right.
Oh, wow.
So I looked at that.
And so anyway, and we have a young speaker. We have Jerome Horne is Director of Transit Leadership for the Transit Center, and Paul was kind enough to set all this audiovisual equipment up. We give him a hand. Well, I just met Jerome, those of you on Facebook, and transit enthusiasts that probably connect. How many of you have connected with Jerome either on LinkedIn or Facebook?
A few.
More, we need more. Maybe there'll be more after tonight.
Now let me know who it is.
I'm not going to take the spoils or give the spoilers. I'll let Jerome do his own spoilers. So everyone, please give your full attention to Jerome.
I don't know.
If I could do a brief introduction for Jerome, if that's all right. So we really appreciate Jerome doing a presentation for us. This is, as Bob mentioned, a first for the ERA to do a presentation at the annual dinner, annual meeting. And we're thinking about what the kind of appropriate presentation would be. So I think this is probably a little bit different than the normal, whatever that is, right? The normal ERA meeting presentation. I think this would be a little more contemporary, kind of a forward look at the state of transit. So Jerome is here. Jerome comes to us from a group called the Transit Center. If you're not familiar, I'm sure Jerome's going to kind of explain the Transit Center a little bit in his presentation. Jerome leads their efforts around increasing representative leadership and inclusive decision-making in the transportation field. The Transit Center's mission is to improve transit in ways that make our cities more just and sustainable. So Jerome is, I think, a professional advocate, which is something I'm very envious of, that kind of job, so that's good. So Jerome, I've known Jerome several years. I originally met Jerome when he was working at Indigo, which is the public transit agency in Indianapolis, and Jerome was there for a significant amount of change when they passed a successful funding referendum and implemented their Red Line BRT, which he played a major role in. And Jerome's also been recognized by the industry. He was a recipient of the Mass Transit Magazine's 40 Under 40 honors in 2020, and is a member of the American Public Transportation Association, or APTA, their Emerging Leaders class of 2022. Jerome also helped found and is the previous chair of the Young Professionals in Transportation Indianapolis chapter, as well as Deputy Director of Communications for YPT from 2018 to 2020. Jerome now lives here in New York and lives in Flatbush, where he spends a lot of time in Prospect Park, riding his bicycle, and curating memorabilia. So Jerome, take it away.
Thank you so much, Paul. I'm delighted to be here this evening. This is really exciting for me. I'm a professional in transit, but I'm also a transit fan, a transit enthusiast. This really just kind of through my soul. So it's a pleasure and delight to be with you this evening. Before I start, I kind of want to talk about this. So this is the Indigo Red Line, which is a bus rapid transit line in Indianapolis. It runs sort of north-south in the central core of the city. And I just thought it was interesting. We are the Electric Railroaders Association, but I put an electric bus. I was deeply involved with this project, and it was really cool to see something go from design to actually construction and seeing it operate. But what I will say, we'll get back to this a little bit later, battery electric buses. Technology is getting better every year. It's still not quite there yet. These buses are built by BYD, Build Your Dreams, or as some people like to say, build your disaster. Now, when they work, they are smooth, they're quiet, they're great. The manufacturer, we signed a contract at Indigo that said this bus must get a range of 275 miles on a charge down to 0 degrees. That is not realistic at all. It's more like 180 miles or something along that. But what I will say is that we have, there's doors on both sides, full level boarding, full off-board payments, center running dedicated lanes. So one of the better BRT systems in the US. So now I'll move into the program.
If you'll allow an interruption.
Yep.
Is this building the terminal? Is this what used to be an interurban building?
It is not so this is a station, but we're actually very close to where the Indiana Traction Terminal used to be. It's only like a block away from where this photo was taken. So, I may need. Yeah, I may have to come over here and do this. Let's see. There we go. All right. So I think it's important to humanize myself and tell you a little bit about me. It was the first time I was on the news when I worked for the transit system in Indianapolis. The camera was just showing and I was there. Over here is a copy of an email. And it's an email that I sent when I was 10 years old. It was my first email, and it was to the then CEO of the transit agency in Baltimore, asking him, how can I get your job when I grow up? So at age 10, I was already thinking about, how can I be a transit CEO? I don't know how many 10-year-olds are thinking that. Ask me if I still think that when I get to the end of the presentation. But he responded, and this is his response. And it was kind of a beautiful moment for me. He responded and said, hey, Jerome, even at the age of 10, it's not too early to begin thinking about a career in transit. Maybe go to college, take some business courses. It was a really heartfelt personal response. And that sort of lit a spark when I was 10 years old. You see me here at a few conferences. A highlight, I met Anthony Fox, which was one of the secretaries of transportation under Obama, transportation secretary. So that was a big highlight for me. Okay. We'll figure this out. There we go. So I come to transit from a really interesting background. I did not go to school for urban planning or public policy or anything like that. I was actually a music education major. And you see me here, I was a drum major for my college marching band. And if there are any band people, does anyone know what this is? Ooh, wait, did I hear it? French horn, E-flat tuba, very close. What? Yeah, so the official, so it's a euphonium, actually. And euphonium, yes, yeah, most people don't know what it is. It's a baby tuba, more or less, that's what it is. But I always think it's important to kind of explain, I come to this using music, and music is a left brain, right brain activity. And music, very similar to transit, you have to orchestrate all these different parts and people to try to bring them together to create harmony. And I kind of see the same thing with transit. You're trying to bring all these different resources together to create harmony or seamless mobility for the people that we serve. So, a little more of my transit enthusiasm. So, I've traveled around the country quite a bit, and I usually go to different transit agencies, and I go meet with their staff, and I always ask, can I get a tour of the rail facility? So this is me in a few cabs. I think this is Baltimore Metro, MARTA, Minneapolis Light Rail, Houston Light Rail. So I really am a big nerd and a fan of this activity and what we do. And then once again, at some of those other properties, I'm sure most of these are obvious. Does anyone recognize this train? Baltimore, yes. And this is one of, there's a few, one of the last pieces of BUD equipment that's still running. BUD Universal Rapid Transit Vehicle, which Miami also used, and now Baltimore and Miami are once again new Hitachi rail cars. Oh, I advanced too fast. All right. So another piece of history. So I've already talked a little bit about the Red Line in Indigo, and I thought it was very interesting. When we built the project, it's 13.5 miles. And 90% of the corridor, we had to pull out the streetcar rails that were still embedded under the street while we were putting in the bus rapid transit. And the last streetcar line to run in Indianapolis was the College Avenue line in 1953. This is actually the morning of the last streetcar running, and I thought, oh, it'd be kind of cool to try to recreate this picture on the morning that the BRT service launched. You know, rest in pieces, streetcar named Expire. That's what they called it then. About this. So the most sort of vocal opposition we had to the project was in the northern 3 miles in a neighborhood called Broad Ripple in Indianapolis. And Broad Ripple is a streetcar suburb. It exists, and it is in the form that it is in because the streetcar ran there. And almost one for one, we put back the stations or where there were streetcar stops. And so this is actually me doing a news story talking about the history of the streetcar and the rails that we were pulling out. And you know, it's just kind of an irony that the most vocal opposition was talking about how we're destroying the character of their neighborhood by putting in transit, but their neighborhood was created because transit ran there. And then so because I'm a nerd, I had to have a piece of it, so I have a 2 foot chunk of the rail in my personal collection. And then this is a great book, Indianapolis Railways by Jerry Marlette. If you're looking for a comprehensive history of the traction history in Indianapolis, highly recommended book. Yes?
2 foot section, how much does that weigh?
Oh gosh, you know, I mean, it's probably 100 plus pounds. I mean, I can pick it up barely, but yeah. So, yeah.
It's like a running rail. It's like a running rail or somewhere.
This rail, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's probably pretty close. It has to be pretty close. Yeah. So. All right, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about Transit Center. I just wanted to give you kind of a little bit of an introduction to who I am and sort of how I approach transit and the work that we do. So Transit Center, we are a nonprofit, but we're a private foundation. We're funded by an endowment, and we're only 9 years old as an organization, so we're still relatively new. We have a staff of 16, and we have a few main areas that we focus on. So we do policy, we do research, technical assistance with transit agencies, and we support different advocacy groups and campaigns throughout the country, and now we do leadership development. So we issue a lot of reports. So one of our most recent reports was called Equity in Practice, and that was kind of looking at transit agencies and sort of how they're allocating service and where they're allocating service to. Are we serving neighborhoods that really need transit service? Where, you know, one of the profiles in that report, we actually look at Minneapolis, and they have a great program called Better Buses. And it's really figuring out how do they make sure that they put shelters and real-time arrival information and different better amenities for riders, especially in neighborhoods that are more reliant on transit. We did a really great video last year about the legacy of racism in transit. One of our directors of research wrote a book called Better Buses, Better Cities, which I think is a really approachable and very clear book on an introduction to how transit sort of works in the country and how it's funded, and the importance of the bus, which we'll come back to the bus in a little bit. And then this is Ride NOLA, which is a transit advocacy group in New Orleans. And we give out grant funding to transit advocacy groups all across the country. Ride NOLA in New Orleans has been one of our most successful ventures. Some of you may know the transit agency in New Orleans was completely contracted out, and it has recently turned back into a public agency with public staff. And Ride NOLA has been really kind of one of the drivers behind that, and they have really formed a relationship with the transit agency staff. It's a pretty interesting thing and a really great thing to see advocates and agency staff, actually talking to each other and working with each other. They definitely have their disagreements, but it's really great because that relationship is resulting in some positive changes for New Orleans. In fact, they just rolled out a bus system redesign, and a lot of the improvements that happened were because of this advocacy organization that we help support. So we'll talk a little bit about the current state of transit. So it is, no surprise and no mystery to anyone that the pandemic really, really impacted agencies, and some more than others. This is really sort of showing the cliff where we have a bus literally falling off, really showing how ridership dipped at the beginning of the pandemic. And as you can see here, pre-pandemic ridership was about 2.5 billion per quarter, and ridership declined about almost 75% nationwide. So we did, I worked with a group and we did some surveys of agencies because we were curious how they were approaching pandemic and service recovery, ridership recovery, and what they were thinking about. And we got 25 agencies to respond, and these heard from. So we heard from all the way from right here in New York City, MTA, all the way down to Gold Coast Transit in California, San Francisco Bay Ferry, and MTD in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, which is actually a really heavily University of Illinois solid operation. But we got a good variety. Obviously, up and down the East Coast, we got a ton of responses. And one of the things we talked about was, looking at the different modes of transit and seeing what people were riding. And even before the pandemic, the bus was still the mode that was carrying the most amount of people. And it is still the mode that is carrying the most amount of people overall, followed by subway, commuter rail, light rail, and ferry. So the bus really fills in the gaps. Obviously, rail cannot go everywhere. And a lot of people rely on bus service. And we saw that throughout the pandemic, there were several cases where bus ridership never dropped as steeply as rail ridership. And that the people that were still riding the bus were, we call it essential workers. Honest, they were always essential workers, even before the pandemic happened. And oftentimes they tend to be lower income and people of color. And so the bus was already playing an important role and still plays an important role. And so throughout our survey of these transit agencies, we kind of looked at some of the responses that we got and the words that were in the responses from these different agencies. So obviously pandemic, we see customer information, ridership, mobile ticketing, some of the things, ADA improvements, which is a big thing, dedicated bus lanes, which actually in some ways, the pandemic was a challenge, but it also presented a great opportunity to think about how we allocate street space in particular. And there were some projects in cities around the country, particularly some dedicated bus lane projects that really took off during the pandemic. I did a presentation at the National Association for City Transportation Officials last month, and we talked about sort of the rise of the bus lane. And we're seeing a lot of great bus lane projects come up. Of course, one of the challenges with bus lanes is enforcement and keeping them clear. And some of that is design. There are bus lanes that are on the sides, and there are bus lanes that run down the center. And we usually find that center running bus lanes are better designed because there's less impedance with traffic, and they just result in more reliable service. So another thing we asked these different transit agencies was whether or not they had a staff person or department that was focused on customer experience. And this is beyond customer service. Customer service is part of this, but customer experience takes that a little further. We're really thinking about wayfinding, signage, maps. Are they clear and legible? What tools are available to riders when they're planning their trips? Is real-time information available and being broadcasted so that people can see when their next bus is coming? And really thinking about experience that riders have. What are are the stations clean? Are the buses clean? Are the places where shores about about times where maybe you've waited at a bus stop at night that wasn't very well lit, or you're standing at a bus stop that is in the middle of the blazing sun and there's no shelter. So we were really delighted that 13 of the 25 agencies that responded actually have staff that are dedicated now, and this is a fairly recent phenomenon, to customer experience. And some of the key themes that also arose was safety and perception of safety, reliability of service, obviously cleanliness, desire for more frequent service, which is no surprise, right? Transit is as how often it comes. Yeah, no worries. And then, one of the other things we heard was more desire for weekend service and later evening service. Those of us that live here in New York, while obviously the MTA could use a lot of improvement, compared to some places in the country where, bus service stops at 8 p.m. or there is no Sunday service, no weekend service at all. And we still have several cities in this country that are like that. And so that is something that we're hearing about, and that, a lot of places are beginning to look at, how can we provide better service? How can we have these longer spans? How can we run service on the weekends? So pandemic service levels. Once again, this is about the bus. And really, the most important thing is this chart over here. The orange is every other mode, the blue is the bus. And what you're seeing is that the bus began to recover quickly than every other mode. And it's still, there are some places where there are bus routes that are either at or have now exceeded their pre-pandemic service levels in certain cities. Including a few here as well. One of the most telling, so I live in Brooklyn, in Flatbush, and Flatbush Avenue, we have the B41 and the B41 Limited. And that corridor moves about 180,000 people a day on the bus alone. But that corridor is very congested, and we have situations where we'll have a B41, a regular local B41 and a B41 Limited, bunching, and you'll have 2 or 3 of them stacked on top of each other. And then of course you have this gap where you now have like a 20-minute gap in between for service, in between. New York DOT and MTA have recently started studying Flatbush Avenue and looking at, possibilities for dedicated bus lanes or queue jumps where the bus can get a special signal to jump ahead of cars and traffic, and other transit signal priority, other treatments to help speed up bus service. So a lot of people are really putting a lot of eyes on that to see what improvements can be made there. But in particular is one of them that did not drop a lot during the pandemic and is now already back at and exceeding its ridership.
How's the trolley bus different from light rail, other than the fact that it doesn't have fixed rail?
Yeah, well, that's really the biggest difference, right? Obviously, light rail trains, right? The trains have more capacity, right? Can carry more people. But yeah, one of the things, so of course now we're down to 4 cities in the US that have trolley buses, because now we don't have them in Boston anymore. I was in Seattle a few weeks ago and got to ride their trolley buses finally. One of the things we're seeing, Dayton, of course, a lot of the cities, Dayton in particular, right, they have made a really calculated decision that it's, they might as well keep that infrastructure and keep their trolley buses running. And of course, they've come up with a new generation of bus that can go off wire and provide some flexibility there. So, I guess that's probably the biggest thing, trolley bus, right, it can, some of the newer buses now have the ability to divert off corridor if there's a blockage or something like that. And obviously, train, you're stuck on the tracks. If there's, if something goes wrong, you're out of luck until you can clear that out of the way. But,
yeah, but the other thing that particularly benefits Dayton is that in the eyes of the Federal Transit Administration, trolley buses count as a fixed item.
This is true.
They get
more money.
not a substantial amount of
Yes.
money for maintaining the infrastructure. And I think in the long run, that may be a model of how electric buses can work, because
Yeah.
Dayton routes have substantial portions of off-wire operation as well as on-wire, and that hybrid is something that's working good for several years. So that's that can actually make electric buses work, is really working with the
probably less.
Yeah, and while we're on that, I'll just say really quickly, we're seeing there's almost like a mandate now for everyone to electrify their bus fleet, and there's sort of this tension of the amount of money and capital that has to go to retrofit every existing facility, build new facilities, buy electric buses, train mechanics, train operators on the differences, and there's a tension between doing that but also just running more service. Because one of the things that we're looking at Transit Center is we want to see more service, because we know that what's really going to make an impact on greenhouse gas emissions is having a lot more and a robust amount of transit service running. Even if that means they're diesel buses, that's still much better than having people drive their cars. So not against electrification of buses, but there's a tension between the priorities and the urgency that we need to move to provide a lot more transit service in this country. Another big theme came out of the pandemic, and a lot of agencies are beginning to look at, is their fare program and their fare structures. Obviously, a lot of agencies, particularly especially here, right, New York, almost half of the operating revenue came from fares pre-pandemic. And obviously, different agencies have different fare box recovery ratios. Some of them are really, really low. In particular, it may actually be cheaper to just go fare free because of the amount of money that they have to spend on collecting the fare and administrating, getting the money, counting it. In some cases, for very small agencies, it's more cost effective to just go fare free. But obviously, for a lot of the bigger systems, that right now is just not an option. And so people are looking at, low-income fare programs, half-fare programs. There is also fare integration. One of San Francisco, the Bay Area, has 27 different transit operators, which is crazy. And there has been this kind of effort, Connect Bay and Seamless Bay Area, where they are actually making some really significant progress on fare integration, where you have one card, one system that works for all the different agencies. And that's really great because a lot of riders have to use more than one system to complete a journey. And we really want to make that experience for riders seamless, and that they don't have to think about, I have to do the math here because I'm getting on AC Transit now, and then I'm getting on BART, and then I'm taking SamTrans, right? And so this is really good. And we see some other regions, DC, the Washington, DC region is looking at this. Obviously, here I think that MTA hoped that Omni would be a regional fare integration. We still have a lot of work to do with that. But that's one big thing. And then fare capping, which is another new trend where basically what they're doing is, a lot of riders before, especially people that rode every day, they might buy a monthly pass, maybe their employer would pay for it. But we also have a lot of riders that are low income and could not afford to buy the cost of like a monthly pass. So here, an unlimited Metro card here in New York City is $127 a month. And there are a lot of riders that just could not afford to pay that upfront cost. So they're paying per ride, and they end up paying a little bit more money paying per ride. So what fare capping does, now that the MTA has is switching to Omni from MetroCard, this is an account-based system, so everyone gets this card, and the card can basically, track the different transactions, and what it can do is people ride, especially for people that are working in the essential jobs, they're riding almost every day. Once they get to 12 rides, then the rest of their rides are at no additional cost to them for the week. And it can track those rides, no matter how many rides they do for that week period. And so we're seeing a lot of transit systems. We actually did this in Indianapolis. Portland, Oregon has been doing this. There's a few other properties around the country that are doing fare capping. And this is, and it can work on a daily, weekly, or monthly cycle. So, sorry? Yes. Yes.
So I'm going to take this opportunity but I'm going to point out that we have North American manager.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you.
North American manager of UITP here, Andy Baba.
Yes.
Who's our executive director. But I'm sure if you haven't, you all should look at Europe and Germany, in particular Berlin. At least 10 years, they've had 33 systems work under one fare structure. not a single fare, it's a zone fare.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter if it's rail or bus, it's roughly distance-based, and I think a lot of the German and Dutch cities, maybe more again, and probably knows much more about it, but fare integration is actually pretty advanced in Europe. Fare capping, I think, is newer, and I think the Brits came up with
And if you go to Japan, it's nationwide.
You have one, yes, yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, that's, of course, the curse of this region, we have 3 states.
Yes,
The curse of this region.
yes, yes. Yeah, I mean, great. There are many, international examples and best practices, and we'll get to a little bit of, one of the big problems here in the U.S. with getting better transit, which I'm sure will be no surprise to anyone. And then the other thing that we want to talk about really quickly is this word equity is being thrown around a lot, and it's almost become a buzzword, but a lot of people don't actually know what does that mean. And I think this is a really great illustration because it's transportation-based. I love to buy all the time. And really it's showing what the difference between equality and equity is. So we have people in this photo that are all sort of different shapes and sizes and different abilities. We have a person that uses a wheelchair, a very tall person, we have an average sized person, and what appears to be a young child. And they're all on the same size bike. And that's giving everyone the exact same thing. Well, in equity, the difference is that we're meeting people where they're at. So I don't know how many of you are familiar, but for like a person who uses a wheelchair, we have these great recumbent bikes that people can use. And it's really great. It opens up that opportunity for someone to get a similar experience riding a regular bike. And then everyone else is put onto an appropriate size bike for them. And so it's really about understanding the different limitations are, trying to meet them where they are and give everyone the opportunity to have a similar experience. And in transit in particular, with transit planning, we've seen this where certain transit lines went and didn't go. We see this with the actual structure of transit agencies, transit agency boards, who holds power and who doesn't hold power. One of the big things that we're looking at Transit Center is, every transit agency is different. And a lot of transit agency boards are different. And there's sort of this tension between agencies that have outsized representation in the suburban areas, despite maybe not but the majority of the ridership being in the urban core. And figuring out how do you balance that out with, if we're trying to provide all things to all people, how do we take a look at that and try to maybe correct that in a way that makes more sense? So a lot of challenges. It's not an easy thing to do, but it's definitely a big theme that's coming up in transit as we move forward and think about the future of service. And then I'll touch really quickly, this is obviously a big topic. This is our most recent report that we did at Transit Center, and we're actually having an event next week, a live Zoom web stream that we're going to do. Bus operators' devices. One of the biggest things we saw is that this has been a problem that's been brewing before COVID. COVID, like many things, just made it more pronounced and worse. For example, in Indianapolis, we wanted to do a full bus system redesign in 2019 when we opened our BRT. We could not do the design because we needed to hire 300 more operators, but we couldn't get 300 more operators in 2019. And there are several transit agencies that have tried to do bus system redesigns, which actually add more revenue service hours. And they're unable to do these because they cannot get enough operators to operate the service. And so there are many reasons for this. I'm not going to go through all of them, but one of the biggest things, some of it is pay, right? We need to pay operators the worth of the job, but some of it is also things outside of pay. It is environmental factors, right? A lot of bus operators, we're asking bus operators to wear, 20 different hats. You need to drive the bus in a very difficult condition. Sometimes you're playing counselor, therapist, you're monitoring the people on the bus, you might be doing a fare dispute, and sometimes you might even have interactions with passengers that could be violent. And so, there are a lot of factors that contribute to why we're having issues with retention and attrition in the transit industry. Another big thing something as simple as bus operators being able to use the restroom at the end of their route in their sort of break time, right? That's a big, big issue. Yes.
23 years driving a bus. That was a big. I knew drivers that.
Yes, you know, and this is like, absolutely, and this is like basic human dignity. So, you know, transit agencies really need to figure out, you know, restoring dignity and respect to the job and make sure that we're taking care of operators and operators have support. And that goes beyond the monetary. It also, you know, having, you know, some transit agencies are actually beginning to start therapy sessions and counseling for operators as well. So, I mean, we're really talking about how do you look at the complete human? Because if they have their basic human needs met, they're going to be a lot better and happier at their job, and which means hopefully we'll have happier riders as well. So we're seeing a lot of agencies change hiring requirements as well. There's sign-on bonuses and recruitment bonuses that have been pretty popular. And you know, one of the other tensions is really figuring out the relationship and balancing the union relationship and the seniority. A lot of younger operators are coming in and they want more flexible hours, but you know, the way that the operators work, right, is that you pick work based on seniority. So a lot of the senior operators get to drive sort of the Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 schedule. And a lot of the younger operators are saying, nope, not doing this. It's not going to work. And so I think that, you know, that's a tension that's going to take a while to figure out. But that is something that is going to need to be addressed if there is going to be a future of the workforce, because, you know, that's just, you know, a change that people are demanding. And we're seeing that happen in every industry, you know, right now. It's not just transit. Right. So one thing that I wanted to show, I talked about bus system redesigns a little bit already, so I'm not going to belabor that. But what I wanted to show, this is the city of Indianapolis, all 400 square miles of it. And you can see we have huge swaths where there is no transit service because it's either farmland or just it doesn't make sense. It's not transit supportive. Oh, the slide changed. Let's go back. I'm almost done. There we go. So, but the most important thing about this map is that it's color-coded. And the lines that are green are routes that run once an hour. The lines that are blue are routes that run every 30 minutes. The lines that are red are lines that run every 15 minutes or better. And this was the existing Indianapolis system, where the majority of the system, most of the routes were only running once an hour or every 30 minutes. And, you know, if you're thinking about planning your life around transit, if you're going to a job interview, you know, you're on a bus route that only comes every 30 minutes and you miss one, or a bus breaks down, you know, you're going to miss that job interview. You may lose your job if you're trying to get to work. And so,
if you're in a hurry, don't take a bus.
I mean, yeah, right. But I mean, right. I mean, so, you know, one of the big emphasis is on increasing frequency. And so this is sort of showing the bus system redesign, and the presence of more red lines is showing that frequency increase, having those routes that run every 15 or every 10 minutes or better, which for Indianapolis was a significant change. This was actually a 65% revenue service hour increase, which really just speaks to how bad the service had become and how disinvested transit had become in Indianapolis. And the reality is, even with this increase, it's still not where it really needs to be. But, you know, we try to accept progress, not perfection. So the other big thing that's changed on the pandemic is public engagement. And I always love using this slide from the Simpsons cartoon of, you know, public meetings can be crazy. They can be, you never know what could go on. Best things that came out of the pandemic, and it even has happened here at ERA, right, is that you were able to reach more people. There were people internationally that tuned in for Zoom. And very similar, a lot of transit agencies started switching public meetings and open houses to Zoom, and now many have resumed doing public meetings in person, but also doing hybrid, where they'll actually record the public meeting so that people online can either tune in or go back and watch later. And it is allowing a lot more people to have access to information and learn about different services and things that are happening at transit agencies. And so it's been really good to see. And one of the other big approaches is meeting people where they are. I actually started a program when I worked at Indigo called our Transit Ambassadors. These were volunteers that we recruited, and almost 95% of them were our regular riders. And what was great is that our regular riders, of course, are familiar with the system. They ride the system every day. And I was one of the rare staff members that also rode the system every day and at night and on the weekends. And so I got a lot of street cred from our riders and our operators because they saw me on the system at all different times. But the great thing about this program is we went to where our riders were. We went to bus stops. We rode bus routes. We went to our main transit centers. And we talked to our riders about different changes that were coming. And it was amazing. The first year we did this, so many of our riders were like, I can't believe someone is coming to the bus stop to talk to me, or someone is on the bus riding to talk to me about, am I aware of information and changes? And so it's been a really popular program. It's still going on. Lots of transit agencies have started a similar ambassador program. And it's a really good way to improve customer service and customer experience. Because, a lot of people are busy. Some people do not have time to come to, a public meeting on Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. And so this is a really great way to make sure we're reaching out to more people. And then finally, one of my friends decided to make a meme out of me. One of the big things, actually, Transit Center, our next report will be about regional rail. And we're kind of making an emphasis on getting away from the word commuter, because the word commuter kind of has this stigma attached to it. It's like Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, which, yeah, there are some people that are still going in on that schedule, but a lot of that has changed, right? And commuter rail, especially, that is the mode that is still struggling the most around the country with ridership. But what we are seeing, though, is a lot more people riding on weekends and midday. And the thought process here is thinking more like German S-Bahn, right? Thinking about how do we make commuter rail to regional rail, that comes more frequently, that runs in both directions, that has a better span of service, and really using this amazing infrastructure that we already have. SEPTA, right? SEPTA should be the envy of the nation. They have great bones. It's all there. It's all already electrified, right? There's some corridors that are inactive that could be activated again. And there's potential for that in a lot of cities around the country, including here. And so, sorry? Center City Tunnel, right? Someone told me that you couldn't through-run trains. That's what I heard. Anyway, we'll talk about that. But anyway, but the point is, there's a lot of opportunity to really capitalize on the asset of what's existing on the ground. There's even opportunities to do transit-oriented development and a lot of these huge parking lots that are just sitting there. Could be a good revenue generator for the agency, and it's another way to build in ridership, right? If people live right there. Obviously, there's some tension there. Some communities don't want upzoning, but it's something really neat to think about. And if we look at international best practices, right? There's some rail systems, right, that are in the real estate game. They're in the transit-oriented development game, and it's a great way to generate additional revenue. And then finally, I just want to talk a little bit about the human capital side of transit. Yes, Train Daddy. There's a lot of focus on the technical, and I'm, like I said, just like you, I'm a big nerd. I care about the different types of subway cars and different buses. But what's also often overlooked is the people that are in charge, the people that are running transit systems, and who they are as people and how they lead. And one of the program that I'm actually starting at Transit Center is focused on leadership development. And it's really coming out of this need that we feel like there's a lot of people in transit, particularly people in high positions and some people on transit boards, that they don't ride the system. They are disconnected from the daily lived experiences of riders, and aren't necessarily always making decisions with the riders in mind all the time. And so we're really looking for people that are more inclusive in their decision making, where they consider that different people have different lived experiences, and those different lived experiences bring different points of view and perspective. And so if you're going to be an effective leader, you need to be someone that is conscious of that, but you also need to lead by example. And I put Andy Byford on here because, right, he is still talked about to this day, right, because people saw him on the system. They saw him picking up trash off of platforms. They saw him on the bus. He didn't own a car, right? I mean, he was really sort of the definition of the type of person you want running a transit system. And so, we really kind of uplift him. And there's several other people actually around the country that are really great at this. In San Francisco, in Muni, there's Jeff Tumlin. He's a general manager. Doesn't own a car. He bikes everywhere, walks everywhere, or takes the transit system. And it shows in how they think about transit, because they're actually on the system every day and they're really living their lives. Yes. Yes, and Rich Davey, who I've had the pleasure of running into twice now. And I tell you, the first time I met Rich, I was so impressed. Very down to earth, very approachable. And just, I feel that he was a good pick. And so, we need more leaders like that. But the other thing that I think is really important is leaders aren't just CEOs. And to be a leader doesn't mean you need to be in the C-suite. You could be a mechanic or you could be an operator and still be a leader, because you have. And I think it's really important that we also out the frontline workforce, because many of them, and we've seen this with a lot of people who've actually risen up the ranks in transit, and that's a great asset, right? Because they have firsthand knowledge, on the ground experience, actually operating a vehicle and then moving over to the administrative side. And so we're putting a lot of emphasis on transit agencies, making sure that when they're doing outreach, make sure that you're not only talking to the public outside the agency, but are you talking to your operators and mechanics? Are you talking to the people that also have great knowledge and need to be informed? And then are you thinking about how some of those people, if they desire, can move up in the agency and in the industry if they wish to? And so, really thinking about it across sort of the full spectrum, not just the management side or the administrative staff, but also looking at frontline staff and their careers and progression as well. And then I'm going to end here. This wasn't. This is an actual. This is an article from 2018. I've used this in a few other shows, and it always gets a great response. One of the dangers we have right now with transportation and transit in particular is, oh God, my slides keep advancing. Give it away. One of the dangers we have right now, right, is there's all these shiny distractions and people that are technology is going to solve all our problems, and we're going to figure out how you can take your own little tiny pod by yourself to everywhere you need to go and never have to interact with anyone who's not like you. And obviously Elon Musk is the subject of this with his Tesla tunnels. But there's a lot of that, and the problem is this is even getting into elected officials and decision making, where we're having elected officials actually spending public time and money considering Elon Musk building a Tesla car tunnel underneath Las Vegas or other cities, when what we really need to do is figure out how to provide better public transit with trains and buses, bike lanes, dedicated bus lanes, because that is efficient and that's how you move lots of people in finite space. So. I always love saying that technology does not change geometry. And I think this is really important to think about. Okay, so we have a wine glass here. All right? Now, the wine glass stays the same size throughout time. 100 years ago, could a baby elephant fit in this wine glass? Can a baby elephant fit in this wine glass now? Is a baby elephant going to fit in this wine glass 100 years from now? Probably not. Right? And unless we figure out, Honey, I Shrunk the Kid, or the Shrink Ray, or the, well, what I'm getting at here, right, is it's about space efficiency. And transit and bikes and walking, those things do that really well. We've got, 40 people on a bus, 40 people on bikes, 40 people in cars. And we have a regular car, an electric car, an autonomous car. Now, people say autonomous cars, if they ever get here, all platoon, but they still take up a lot of space. And we still have to store them somewhere. Right? So what we're getting at is that there's a lot of distraction out there about technology and about autonomous vehicles and all these, the Hyperloop, which Elon Musk has admitted was, basically a bunch of BS to try to derail California high-speed rail. Don't get distracted. People keep trying to reinvent it, but every time, it's like, we're putting a box on wheels that has multiple doors that open and close, and there's a reason why the vehicle form factor has pretty much stayed the same. Yes, technology can help us get better, with certain levels of automation and things like that. But more or less, a subway train is a subway train. A bus is a bus, a bike is a bike. And they are how you move a lot of people very efficiently, especially in big cities where we have a lot of density and clogged streets. So the last thing I'll leave you with at the end of the presentation, I'm crazy. No, so this is part of my personal collection of transit memorabilia, and it's actually known as the International Micro Museum of Transit. And this is not all of it. This is about 60% of it. This was staged for a magazine photo shoot that I did when I lived in Indianapolis. The collection, I believe, right now is probably worth around $25,000, $30,000. I'm still updating my cataloging, but I have about 250 rail transit signs and about 300 plus scale models of buses and trains, streetcars. And then there's a bunch of maps and schedules and fare media, fare tokens. But I just thought it was really important to show that, when I say I'm really passionate about what I do, I really mean it. And I'm not just, I don't, even though I work at a think tank in a, sort of ivory tower place, I always try to bring the perspective of having actually worked at a transit agency and the fact that I really love this stuff and I think it's really cool. So anyway, that's my presentation for today. So there's my contact info. If you want to get in touch with me, please reach out. I love talking to people. And I'll take any questions if anybody has questions for a few minutes here. I know that was a lot.
Or otherwise, feel free.
Yeah.
Where does, looking at New York City in particular, how does fare enforcement figure into all of this?
Yeah. That could be an entire presentation on its own. It's a great question. There's a lot of nuance there because obviously on one hand we need the fare to support operating, but what we, especially here in New York City, one challenge is a lot of transit agencies are trying to figure out, whether it's installing more barriers or, fare enforcement. One of the challenges there is that a lot of times what we're seeing is that police are targeting particularly young black and brown people more often than anyone else is getting targeted for fare enforcement. And, that's obviously causing a lot of tension. And a lot of agencies are trying to figure out, some agencies have actually decriminalized fare evading. So that it's not like, but still people will get fined. Well, what we're seeing in other cities is a lot of them will have like fare ambassadors, kind of like the transit ambassadors. They'll have fare enforcement officers that roam the system. A lot of the light rail systems, because they're sort of honor payment, they'll do that. And it's a complex issue, right? Because you're trying to balance that transit agencies are really struggling financially. You want everyone who can pay, that should pay. That's why a lot of these programs, like the low-income fare programs, or a lot of schools too, a lot of cities are actually rolling out programs in places where now, kids from kindergarten to 18 can ride free. And I think that's a great way to sort of mitigate some of those issues. But yeah, it's complex. Here in New York City, I don't really know. I'm not sure. Even if we add 2,000 more police officers into the subway, I don't think that's going to fix the problem. So I think we got to think more creatively of how we enforce fare or how we design fare policy that gives different options for people. Obviously, the people that can pay, they should pay. Well, and the other thing we're seeing too, which is interesting, it's not just people that are low income. We're seeing people evade fare around the country. That people are just evading fare because it's like they don't want to pay and they can afford to pay, right? So that's another issue too. So really complex. Next.
I'm glad you bring that up.
Yeah.
It's not just about disadvantaged people that are not paying. I think that's a bit of a stereotype.
Yeah.
I think until we get to a place where there are no fares, like you pointed out, where public transit, the amount of money that's expended to collect the fare, to administer the fare, until we get to a place where a fare just doesn't even make any sense anymore. At the end of the day, some revenue is still needed, and the loss of revenue is coming from a broad spectrum.
Oh yeah.
And I think a lot of it, I think the pandemic has really shifted thinking among amongst law enforcement, thinking amongst agencies. I mean, it's almost like nobody wants to even go after fare evaders. That's, I work in the industry and I'm a user. I see people holding the gates open for strangers.
Oh, yeah.
They don't know.
Yep.
What is that about? I mean, I really think that really, is it about bucking the system? Is it about some kind of statement that's being made? It's not even that expensive here in New York,
No.
frankly. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
$275 is not a lot of money compared to our world peers. You look
Yeah.
at London, you look at other cities, so really people need to drill down on that. It's just a broader issue of, and it's broader than enforcement. It's broader
Yeah.
issues of equity. I think it's a little bit bigger.
Yeah. Oh, sure. And I didn't get into a lot of the, like, I could go on and talk about a lot of this in a lot more detail. I mean, there's a lot more specificity and nuance there. I mean, you know, some of it could be people were making, you know, political statements of their own, right? You know, unfortunately, the pandemic gave a lot of people time to, like, reassess their life and think about their priorities and, you know, what they think is just or not just. So, yeah, it's, yeah. Yeah. I mean, right, we in the United States, we could tomorrow and overnight fund transit, you know, and get rid of fares everywhere and run transit at great service levels. But we need the political will to be able to do that, right? That's the biggest barrier, is that we can't make the improvements we need to make because, you know, we could have the best staff at transit agencies. We could, you know, have the best advocates. But if we can't get elected officials to move, you know, the political will to move on a lot of things, that's also a really big barrier. Yes. Oh, is this your collection?
Oh, I agree.
Oh, yeah. I love that.
It's just part of it.
Very cool. Very cool.
Gotta be shifted
Yeah.
qualified people.
So,
All right.
if there are no more questions,
Yeah.
Jerome will, around 2 minutes to give him a hand.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Since you said you traveled Clapper-Shabby,
Yes.
and I used to drive the B9 from Avenue Well to Hayes Plaza on Clapper-Shabby. You also realize that that line has two different branches, and it's not unusual for buses coming from different branches to be together.
Oh, sure. Yeah, for that bus. I was talking more specifically about B41, but yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Randy,
Yeah.
and Randy
Yes.
is a board member who's driven a train, been a conductor, captain,
Okay.
so he's
Yes.
made his
Yes.
way up.
Yeah.